Holy readers, welcome back to Holy Holy. This is episode 39 of 2025, and we are right here in the middle of the Babylonian exile. And now we're going to talk about making our way back home to Jerusalem. What a journey. We've talked about what led to the Babylonian exile through books like Isaiah, and then moments right in the middle of the Babylonian exile with Jeremiah and Ezekiel, and then Daniel. And now, on our way back home, we're going to go through wonderful books like Ezra, Haggai, Zechariah, eventually Nehemiah. So here's the reading that we're going to recap for this week. September the 22nd through the 28th has us reading Ezra 1 through 4, Psalm 123, 85, 84, 113, 127, and 129. We finish the book of Daniel with chapters 9 through 12, and then we read the book of Haggai, those two little chapters. And then we've got Zechariah chapters 1 through 3, and then Luke 5 through 11, because we're in the Old Testament, and then also we're some in the New Testament. So the Babylonian captivity, remember that Jeremiah 25 and then Jeremiah 29, he prophesies 70 years of Babylonian captivity. And there's two ways that scholars count this. Either from 605 to 538 BC, which would be the first deportation to the return. Or you could count it as 586 to 516 BC. And this is the temple's destruction to the beginning of the rebuild. So either one of those ways are about 70 years, making what God spoke through Jeremiah come to pass. So what I want to tell you, though, is that remember that King Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon when the superpower came and took Judah captive, right? And destroyed the temple. But eventually another power arises, and that is Persia. Now, when you hear Persia, you'll probably think of the book of Esther, and that's going to come into play for sure in all of this literature. But the king of Persia is going to be Darius, and we read about that in the book of Daniel. Remember, King Darius is the one that interceded for Daniel when he was thrown into the lion's den. But after Darius, one arises named Cyrus. Now that should be a name that perks your ears, because Isaiah prophesied that a king named Cyrus would allow all of the Jews to return from an exile. And he wrote this hundreds and hundreds of years before, which is really, really powerful. So King Cyrus of Persia, he has now this land with a lot of different people groups that have become captive, not just the Jews. And so he writes a decree called the Cyrus Cylinder. And this is 539 BC. Here's a picture right here of the Cyrus Cylinder. And it is at the British Museum. And so it is a clay cylinder that would have been written on in cuneiform when it was still wet. Now, it's a cylinder and not a tablet, because a cylinder is less likely to break. And they would bury these cylinders in prominent new constructions, new important buildings, so that one day when the building is excavated, there would be historical records of these important decrees, like King Cyrus's decree allowing all the Jews to return back to Jerusalem. So it happens really, this return, in two phases. So the first phase is the largest phase, and it's around 50,000 Jews that leave Babylon, Persia, to go back now to Jerusalem. Now remember, not everyone will leave and go back to Jerusalem, because it's been 70 years. So a lot of them have had families and built businesses and purchased homes, and they don't want to leave. But those that do are welcome to go back to Jerusalem and begin the process of rebuilding. And so these 50,000 in this first return, which is 538 BC, that's the first return, they go under Zerubbabel, who is a governor. He's the governor of Judah. Incidentally, he's mentioned in 1 Chronicles 3:19 and in Matthew chapter 1, verses 12 through 13. And these genealogies show Zerubbabel in the Messianic line, highlighting him as a very important and key figure. Also, though, there's a high priest with Zerubbabel, and his name is Joshua. So don't confuse this Joshua with the Joshua that was the apprentice to Moses. It's a different guy. It's many, many years apart. So this is now Joshua the high priest with Zerubbabel. And so the mission of the first return is to rebuild the temple. But the temple wasn't completed until 516 BC. And Haggai and Zechariah, whose prophetic words we're reading now, they were the ones to really spur this rebuild on, because as you'll read, they experienced a lot of pushback, a lot of difficulty. But also Haggai and Zechariah, these prophets, wanted to make sure that the rebuilding was not just an outward restoration, but it was also an inward restoration. We talked about that a little bit, you and I, with Josiah and his reforms before the Babylonian captivity, that it was more of an outward restoration. And so here, Haggai and Zechariah are saying, make sure that your heart stays pure, that you stay faithful to the covenant. Because now that all of the Jews are headed back, they have to make sure that they don't do the same thing they did that got them here in the first place, which was exile, right? The way that they got into exile was idolatry, oppression of the poor, unfaithfulness to the covenant. And so now they're saying, hey, now that God has brought us back home, make sure that you're faithful to the covenant, that you don't oppress the poor, that you don't worship idols, that it's an inward restoration as well as outward. Now, the second return happens under King Artaxerxes. So now Darius has lost power. Artaxerxes is the new king. And Ezra the scribe then is the priest that leads the second return. It's smaller. It's a smaller return, but it's focused on Torah worship. That's at the center. And of course, Ezra is a scribe, so he is well versed in the Torah and more than able to lead the second return. So why multiple returns? Because this happens over, a longer period of time. And of course, when everyone goes back initially, it's very, very exciting. But you and I know that opposition sometimes makes us feel burnt out or lose our first passion. You may feel that way right now, friend, as we are in September reading our Bible through, and you think, man, I'm tired of it. I'm going to let it go. And I want to tell you, don't lose your passion. Don't lose your fervor. Pray that the Holy Spirit blows on the embers of your heart today and reignites the fire in your heart that he first put there for his word and to know him more deeply. And I promise you that the Holy Spirit will bring great renewal in your life. Zerubbabel, his was a physical restoration. Ezra's is a spiritual restoration. And later we'll see Nehemiah bring a communal restoration. Now let's talk quickly about the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke. You should know that Luke wrote 1/3 of the New Testament. He actually, by word count, wrote more than the Apostle Paul. And it's two volumes. I feel like I wish it was like Luke 1 and Luke 2, or Acts of the Apostles Part 1, Acts of the Apostles Part 2. But it's Luke and Acts. And they are volume 1, volume 2 of the same work. You'll find that they both are addressed to Theophilus, and he is most likely the patron that is paying Luke to write this. One thing that's very important about Luke is that he says he has taken great pains to interview people that heard these stories, that experienced all of this, so that he can write an accurate account. He's not just dreaming these things up. He's not just hearing things and thinking, oh, this would make a good story. But he has eyewitness account that these are the things that happened. Now, Luke has some unique features. One of them is the infancy narratives at the beginning. He's the only one that gives us Gabriel visiting Mary, also the shepherds at Jesus's birth, and then the childhood episode of Jesus in the temple. All of that is unique to Luke. Also, about 1/3 of Luke is parables. And so Luke is the only one that gives us the parable of the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, the rich man and Lazarus, and the Pharisee and the tax collector. Luke does a lot of pairing with men and women. So he gives us Zechariah and Elizabeth. Simeon and Anna, the centurion, and then the widow of Nain. So he's showing this equal participation in God's plan, but he also takes great pains to highlight women in the narrative, women that paid for Jesus's ministry, that were there throughout, and then also at the death and the burial and the resurrection of Jesus. Quickly, as we end, here's the structure. Chapter 1, verses 1 through 4 are the prologue. Chapter 1, verse 5 through 4:13 are the birth and preparation of Jesus. Chapter 4:14 through 9:50, this is Jesus's Galilean ministry. And finally, Jesus's journey to Jerusalem is covered in 9:51 through 19:27. So remember to find us on Facebook. You can watch us on YouTube. You can listen on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. You can also email me at jasmine@regenerationnashville.org. Thank you so much for joining today. Like, share, tell your friends, and I'll see you right here again next week. God bless.